So maybe your draft went exactly how you wanted it to. You got your studs at the beginning, guys that you thought, hey, they are going to lead me to a fantasy football championship in 2021. And now we're 3 weeks in, and you're thinking to yourself, man, these guys, they're just not performing the way that I expected. At the end of the week, you just put your head down into your hands and say, what the f***?
Yeah. Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game. I'm a headliner.
Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners. Got a offbeat episode for you today. Wanted to throw out a little bit of an extra something for you this week and take a look at some of the studs who just are not performing this season and whether or not we think they are going to bounce back. And hopefully by seeing some of these names, you start to understand how funky the start of the season has been for us. But it's not the first time we've seen this. Okay, studs, this happens all the time, and they end up bouncing back. So some of these guys, you just got to stick with, all right? Some of them, maybe not. But we're going to take a look at it and go through a few from each position, and then we'll talk about whether or not we think they are going to bounce back. So let's go ahead and hop into it right now. And we are going to take a look at the quarterbacks and running backs first, and just a couple from each position. Ryan Tannehill and Aaron Rodgers from the quarterbacks. Right now, their current ranks, Tannehill at QB 19, Aaron Rodgers at QB 23. So both of these guys were drafted as quarterback ones. Ryan Tannehill was drafted as the QB 11, Aaron Rodgers as the QB 5. So both of these guys obviously not performing near the level, especially Rodgers, that we would have drafted them to do. Now, I'm going to go through all of the names. We're going to talk for a second, and then we're going to wrap back around to whether or not I think they're going to bounce back. So stay tuned, stick around, hit the like button, and we're going to get to all of that here in just a moment. But Saquon Barkley, also, we want to go ahead and take a look at him real quick at the running back position. RB25 right now was drafted as RB10. And that one maybe not hurting as much as Jonathan Taylor does, because Barkley, we knew it was going to take a little bit of time, right? He's coming off that knee injury last year, maybe not starting 100%. We knew he might be limited to begin the season. Jonathan Taylor, though, a lot of people were like, man, this is some people were drafting Jonathan Taylor as high as RB4 and RB5. Now his ADP did fall around RB8, which honestly wasn't too bad towards the end of the first round, not awful. But then RB29 right now, right? That's definitely not cutting it. That's an awful performance so far. For the wide receivers, a lot of wide receivers underperforming right now. DeAndre Hopkins, currently the wide receiver 20. Now, he was a lot better before this past week. Obviously, with the limited injury a little bit, brought him down quite a bit more. But he was drafted as the wide receiver 5, and he's only the wide receiver 20 right now. Terry McLaurin was drafted as the wide receiver 22. Excuse me. He was drafted as the wide receiver 10. He's only the wide receiver 22 right now. Stephon Diggs, the wide receiver 3, drafted as, or currently sitting at wide receiver 28. Calvin Ridley drafted as the wide receiver 4, currently sitting at wide receiver 30. Those two are probably the most disappointing ones so far. But again, we'll talk about that more here in just a second. And then, of course, Robert Woods, Bobby Trees, sitting at wide receiver 49, drafted as the wide receiver 14. And then a couple of tight ends maybe not performing where people would have hoped. Kyle Pitts, currently the tight end 15, but was drafted as a tight end 4. And then Noah Fant, not a huge fallback from where he was drafted as the tight end 8, currently sitting at the tight end 13. Now, I did mention it when we kicked off the show, right? This isn't the first time this has happened, ladies and gentlemen. It's not like this is the first time ever that studs start off a season slow. They do bounce back. And there's a few examples even from last season that show that, hey, sometimes we just got to wait a few weeks for things to get going. Last season, in weeks 1 through 3, Tom Brady, Deshaun Watson, Kirk Cousins, all of them ended up finishing in the in the quarterback 1 area. In weeks 1 through 3, there were QB 16, 17, and 23. You know, Deshaun Watson, probably the biggest jump there from 17 to 5. Kirk Cousins went from 23 to 11. Tom Brady, 16 to 8. So All three of those guys, running backs, David Montgomery was the RB22 after 3 weeks last season. There was a whole lot of hate on this guy. Oh, he's a bust. Knew he wasn't going to be able. And we tried to tell people, listen, it's kind of the way he's being utilized. All right. Hopefully Matt Nagy gets out of his own way, which he still hasn't done. And then we had injuries to this team. David Montgomery ended up getting some of that utilization at the end of the season, and we saw what he could do with the volume. Goes all the way up to RB4. Antonio Gibson is a rookie, was the RB32 through 3 weeks. A lot of people had given up on him. I know that there was a few people last year who said, man, I dropped him, and then I ended up losing because I didn't have that extra running back. There was a few people who said, oh, I ended up picking him up because somebody dropped him, and they ended up winning a fantasy championship from it. Devontae Adams was the wide receiver 15 through 3 weeks last season. He ended up as the overall wide receiver 1. Allen Robinson, who didn't include him in the section before this, but obviously you all know that we could have. Allen Robinson was the wide receiver 18 last year, finished as the wide receiver 12. Justin Jefferson, another rookie, the wide receiver 20 through 3 weeks last season. Again, another guy where people were like, I just don't think he's got it. I'm going to try and pick up somebody with more upside. Ends up finishing as the wide receiver 6. Rob Gronkowski at tight end 35, finishes the tight end 8. And Logan Thomas, definitely a surprise for a lot of people last season, was tight end 21 through 3 weeks and ended up finishing as the tight end 6. It goes back even further than that. I mean, even in 2019, like in week 1, we had a whole bunch of people. Actually, it was in 2020. Last season, after week 1 kind of went awry for a lot of people. Last season, I tweeted some stats from the 2019 season just to remind people that, hey, Aaron Jones, he was the RB51 after 1 week. He finishes the RB2. Nick Chubb in 2019 was the RB24 after 1 week and finishes the RB7. Joe Mixon was the RB59 after 1 week in 2019, finishes the RB13. Chris Godwin, he was the wide receiver 29 after 1 week, finishes the wide receiver 2. Kenny Golladay was the wide receiver 31 after 1 week, finishes the wide receiver 36. It happens all the time. Mike Evans was the wide receiver 78 and finished as the wide receiver 12. George Kittle was the tight end 13, finishes tight end 2. So again, it happens all the time, right? And it's happening again this season. So if you drafted some of these guys that we talked about already, the season might not be up for you yet, all right? If you're 0-3 or 1-2 right now, you're not out of it. We got to work the waiver wire, and we got to keep our fingers crossed that some of these guys can start bouncing back, because if they do, you can go on a nice little run here, still end up in the playoffs, and still win yourself a championship. So, Ryan Tannehill and Aaron Rodgers, what do we think about them? Ryan Tannehill, I'm a little bit more worried about than Aaron Rodgers right now, mostly because of the injuries on that team. So right now, Julio Jones dealing with an injury, and so is A.J. Brown. When you lose guys like A.J. Brown and Julio Jones, it hurts. And Ryan Tannehill, for me, even if people are like, oh, they're going to be running with Derrick Henry, it doesn't really matter because that's all they've done the last 2 years as well. And Ryan Tannehill has been one of the most efficient quarterbacks down the field the last couple of years. Now, that efficiency hasn't shown up yet this season, but again, dealing with some injuries, new offensive game plan, trying to get going. So do I still believe in Ryan Tannehill? Yes. Right now, I might be fading him just because we don't have Julio Jones and A.J. Brown at 100%. If they get to 100%, I'll be feeling a lot better. But we're going to have to get back to that point at some point in time. For Aaron Rodgers, I'm fine with it. Really, a whole lot of this is kind of based around week 1, right? Week 1 was an absolute disaster for Aaron Rodgers and really all of the Packers. And now they're trying to bring themselves back from that horrid start. So, you know, that's something that you got to keep in mind when you look at your studs too. We're so early in the season. It's like, are they really playing this bad? Is it 1 week? I mean, Aaron Rodgers was the quarterback 34 over the first week of the season after that awful performance. So, I mean, you can see that he's already making those gains forward, right? He's already moving. I mean, he was the quarterback 5 in week 2. So a big step forward from there in week 5 all the way up there, in week 2 all the way up there. So, and then he was QB 17 last week. So again, a little bit of a drop off again, but a tougher performance on the road in San Francisco. They ended up winning the game though. So again, we got to stick with it, right? he's quarterback 23 right now, basically because of that awful start to the season. Does he bounce back? I think so. Saquon Barkley, for me, I'm a little bit more wary of this guy not being an RB1 and more of being like a high-end RB2. Just for the mere fact that the offensive line hasn't been that good. He's getting hit as soon as he touches the football. Daniel Jones, yes, he's put up a lot of fantasy points to begin the season, but I talked about it on the live show last week. He's really propped up by his rushing stats right now. It's not his passing stats. And that's why he is as high as he is right now. We need the Giants to be more healthy, because the healthier the Giants are, the more opportunities there will be for Saquon Barkley to be more efficient. The volume hasn't been the issue really right now, because he's going to get volume. It's the efficiency that's been the issue. Jonathan Taylor, I do expect him to bounce back as well. I would not be surprised if he does end the season more towards low-end RB1 status. He's getting some of the most volume, some of the highest volume right now in the league, in the red zone and at the goal line for running backs. Just hasn't been able to convert yet. I mean, if he converts a couple of these touches, a few more, we're looking at a high-end RB2 right now instead of a low-end or a high-end RB3. So Jonathan Taylor, yes, he's going to bounce back. He's going to end up being just fine as well. DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, we're not fading DeAndre Hopkins at all, but I am hoping that hopefully he gets healthy here very soon. Terry McLaurin, I am a little bit more worried about. That high upside of low-end wide receiver one play this year is probably out the door with Heineke at quarterback now. So Terry McLaurin, for me, I'm looking at the rest of the season probably being a mid-wide receiver too. A decent amount of volume, but maybe not some of those huge games that catapult him up to where he would need to be. Stephon Diggs at wide receiver 28, I think he's going to bounce back, because this is a team that is 100% throwing the ball 35, 40, 45 times a game, even when they're winning by 20-plus points a game. So the amount of volume going to Stephon Diggs is not going to be a concern. Right now, the biggest thing is that Emmanuel Sanders has taken some of those big plays that we saw from Stephon Diggs last year. But as teams start to say, oh my gosh, we got to account for Emmanuel Sanders more, it's going to give some more leeway to Stephon Diggs to see that one-on-one coverage. Calvin Ridley, I am becoming extremely concerned about. And it's nothing that is Calvin Ridley's fault. It's that the offense is not performing. Matt Ryan's not playing well right now. The game plan is awful and predictable. Just Atlanta's offense is a mess right now. So Calvin Ridley at wide receiver 30, does he finish all the way down here? No, that's probably too low. But right now for Calvin Ridley, my hope is that we can get him back to high-end wide receiver 2. Now, is that what you drafted him to be? Absolutely not. But being wide receiver 14 or 15 is a lot better than being wide receiver 30. Okay, so anything extra that we can get from Ridley right now is fine. Also, Cordarrelle Patterson is being utilized a lot more than I had anticipated. And on top of that, Mike Davis is still seeing 5, 6, 7 targets per game. So they're giving a lot of targets to the running back position right now as well. Calvin Ridley will be just fine. But it's not going to be as high as I would have hoped. I think he will still have some good games, but I also think he's going to have some big duds, which is going to make him pretty inconsistent for the rest of the season. Robert Woods, this is kind of his last week. If he was going to bounce back, it is going to be this week. I'm still concerned about him. They have not utilized him in the sense that I was hoping, whereas they would stretch the field a little bit more with him than what they had done with the pass. Van Jefferson, Deshaun Jackson, we're going down the field to them, and then Cooper Kupp is getting a lot of those intermediate routes, and then Tyler Higbee's getting a decent amount of targets right now. So Robert Woods just not getting looked at. Let's see after this weekend. If this weekend does not go well for Robert Woods, it's probably at this point a lost season for him unless there's an injury of some kind. Do we want to drop him? I would hate to, but we're gonna have to consider it. At the tight end position, Kyle Pitts will 100% end up being just fine. He leads the Atlanta Falcons in snaps out of the slot, and he is second to Calvin Ridley in snaps out wide. They're utilizing him all over. He's still having a decent amount of targets, but you're seeing the rookie tight end issues their ugly heads right now. For everybody that loved Kyle Pitts, I had him at like tight end 5. I had him a little bit higher too, just because I knew the volume was going to end up being there for him. But I cautioned everybody all offseason, especially when they still had Julio Jones, be careful what you wish for with Kyle Pitts, because I don't know if he'll go as high. But he's getting a decent amount of volume still. They're lining him up. He's running routes, all of that good stuff. Everything points to him being fine throughout the year. Just expect some up and down performances. And if you're like, Kyle, why are you so much higher on Kyle Pitts bouncing back than Calvin Ridley? They're in the same offense. Well, here's the thing. Kyle Pitts doesn't need much to be a high-end tight end one, mid-tight end one. Calvin Ridley needs a whole lot more, right? It's easier for Kyle Pitts to get back to tight end one status than it is for Calvin Ridley to get back to wide receiver one status. And then Noah Fant, a guy that I was not as high on as everybody else. He's had some decent matchups this year. Had one decent game, really. Right now, he's coming in at tight end 13. Still can get to that tight end 8 mark, but he's going to have to do a lot of that scoring over the next couple of weeks. With KJ Hamler out, hopefully he definitely solidifies himself as the 2 or 3 target on this team. But when Jerry Jeudy comes back, if they still continue to play Tim Patrick on the outside, put Jerry Jeudy in the slot, now you've got those 3 guys with Cortland Sutton playing well. You're still getting a lot of touches to Javonte Williams and to Melvin Gordon. That's going to hurt Noah Fant as well. For me, instead of like the tight end 8 that he was drafted at, where he currently is, I think he finishes in this area, 13, 12, 11, somewhere in there, because I don't think the volume is going to be there of a majority of the season when he gets back, or when Jerry Jeudy gets back. So there you have it, Headliner Nation. A lot to process right now. Stay the course, okay? Yes, we're making changes. Yes, we should be making trades and looking for ways to better our teams. But don't drop some of these guys just because they're underperforming, or don't sell them too low just because they're underperforming. Make sure that you still look at some of these guys and you realize, hey, the opportunity is still there for them to bounce back. But Headliner Nation, do me a favor, hit the like button on the video. Make sure you subscribe if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, and leave a comment down below. Which one of these underperformers do you think has the best shot to bounce back this season? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm out of here. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.
Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game. Y'all stuck on third down. Your content's plain Jane. Headliners on top now. We gonna move and change. Podcast off the rip. Draft guide, so legit. Fantasy world, our game tight. You know we about that chub life. Stuck in a rut and you need some motivation. Head to the channel for this Headliner Nation. I'm a headliner.